Hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today this tutorial is not going to be any kind of animation or anything, though it's a comprehensive tutorial where I teach you how to use and utilize SVG path and SVG vector graphics to create all sort of graphics that you want in your HTML. And then obviously in the next tutorial we're going to go build this kind of cool animation, right? So let's get started. For those of you who don't know what SVG is, SVG is basically a format, a graphics format based on XML, which actually HTML is based on. And all the graphics that you create using the SVG are based on math functions, right? So it's totally different thing as images like in JPEG or GIF or whatever. Uh, I can show you the difference actually over here. So this is starter that I created using Photoshop, right? If I start zooming in, you'll see that the picture at some point gets pixelated, right? Whereas if I start zooming here, you can see that the resolution doesn't get changed, right? So it's very nicely put over here, which is pretty nice, but not on this one, which is based on graphics, right? So with that said, let's get started going back to our HTML, and I'm gonna go remove this, and let's start by creating an SVG tag. Let's give it a width of maybe 200 and height of 200, right? And then you can use different types of tags to create SVG elements, but in our case I want to show you how you can utilize the path, SVG path, to create all sort of lines and curves and stuff. So let's just start by creating a path tag, and then there is this attribute D of the path tag that you can start creating your path. And the way in SVG to create path is that you can imagine like an imaginary pen, right? So you want to go, for example, here and then create a line, right? To do that, you use M, then let's go to 30 and 30, which is X and Y on my SVG. So let me just give it a style of a background, maybe red, right? So this is the area of your SVG. This is the x-axis. This is the origin, right? This is the x-axis and this is the y-axis, right? So when I say M30 and 30, it pretty much ends up maybe somewhere over here, right? That is where my pen starts drawing. And then using the L, then let's say I want to go to the point 70 on my x, and then the same y or y value on my y-axis. That's kind of like I started over here and created a line up until there, right? And to visualize it, I will go to my CSS, right, and say any path that I have, just create a stroke of 0, 0, 0. So basically I give it a stroke, and then I will define a stroke width of maybe 5, so that you can see you have this very nice sort of sharp line. I can go ahead in my HTML, maybe change this, since I know that my width is 200, maybe give it 190. So that's where you have your line, right? There are though some attributes that you can add, and you obviously notice that the properties for SVG is a bit different than HTML, right? In normal situation for an element in HTML, you pretty much use maybe border, right? Border radius, sorry, not border radius, but border and border color. But here for SVG, in order to have that kind of, the similar effect, you need to use a stroke for the color and give it a width. There are some cooler stuff as well, like you can create stroke line cap and then say round. You see that it rounded the each end of this line. So maybe if I add 20, it's more obvious, right? Which is cool. Or you can use maybe square or bot, which is the default. So a lot of times I have seen people using round, right, which is pretty cool. So this is one way of sort of styling your SVG path. The other way is actually going over using the attributes tag, right? So here I can pretty much define stroke and then give it the same thing like 0, 0, 0, and then I can define stroke width and then give it maybe 20, and then stroke line cap, right, to kind of give it maybe round. You can see that I pretty much created the same thing, but obviously the best way to do that is using the classes in the CSS, right? So that there is a nice separation between your markup and the styling that you add to it, right? Nothing fancy. So this is the way you can create path, and I will dive into how to create different kind of curves and stuff. But pretty much, let's say for example we want to create a perfect square over here. So in order to do that, I have created a line over here. So my pen is right now over here. I will create a line. Instead of this, I go, for example, this time I'm going to go, the difference between 30 and 190 is 160. So I will go 190 and then 190. So you can see that my point is right now, my pen is right now. Then I will go back to whatever my original x was, which is 30, and I know my point is 190, so we have something like this. And then obviously I need to go back to my origin of the when the pen started, which is 30 and 30, right? So now if I, in my CSS, if I say fill transparent, you can see that I perfectly have this circle, which the fill itself is transparent. So again, no background or background color for SVG. It's more like fill, right? So pretty easy. This is the way you can programmatically create SVG path, but obviously you can use tools like Adobe Illustrator. It's a pretty expensive tool, by the way, but the cool thing is that they have like a trial version that you can use for a couple of days. So going back to Illustrator, I can show you how easily you can create those things as well. So you can, for example, create a rectangle over here, right? And then go click and hold and create a star like this. And then maybe change the star color to something like maybe this. And then the cool thing with Illustrator is that you can pretty much copy both of these using Command-C or Control-C in Windows, and then go back to your HTML and then just paste it, right? And there you have your very nice vector graphics. And as I said, we are using SVG path. So in Illustrator and a bunch of other tools that you can use, if you don't want to use Illustrator, by the way, you can go search in Google for online SVG path, tools or SVG graphics tools generation, and then you can pretty much get some free ones. So as I said, the most powerful tool in SVG is this pen tool in regards to creating paths. So what I do is that I click here, I click again over here, then I click and drag, kind of gives me this shape, maybe click and drag again, maybe click and drag again, click and drag again, and then when I reach back to my initial point, there's this very nice circle that shows up, and then it says, okay, now I close the path. And what you can do, you can pretty much copy this and then go back in your HTML and then paste it, right? So nothing fancy, nothing serious here. This is how you can create your path. And now just to go a little bit more into how to programmatically create SVG curves, because here you can see that in your Illustrator or whatever tool, you kind of get the curve already. So basically, if you want to create a tool, the recommendation is that start by using some of these tools. There are a bunch of tutorials on YouTube on how to use Illustrator, how to create any kind of shapes and stuff. So I'm not worried about that. So though I would really want to dive into some more like let's say, not simple stuff when it comes to creating path, like when you want to generate curvature, right? So to do that, let's go to search for SVG path, right, in Google. And MDN, which is Mozilla Developer Library, Developer Network, has a very nice article or documentation on how to create different types of path and lines and stuff. As you can see, the first one is MXY, as I showed you. So it basically says where the pen should start drawing, and also a different version of how to write that. So we use this one. You can definitely use this one as well. Then I went over creating how to create a line, right? So you can definitely create a line that I showed you, and this is how you utilize, how to create a path. So what we did, for example, was we went to 30-30, then used line, but here you can see that there is an alternative version, which is H and V. H stands for horizontal, V for vertical. So instead of, let's get here. So let's again create a SVG. Let's create a width of 200 and height of 200 again. And then let's create a path again. And then the D attribute, let's move to 10 and 10. And then create a line to maybe 70 on X and 10, right? Going back to my SVG, my CSS, I say stroke to be, again, black. So you can see you have this line over here. But also, instead of using the line, when you know that you want exactly like straight lines, both horizontally and vertically from where you are, instead of using this, you can pretty much use H and then 70, right? So you don't need to, because you know that you will go on the x-axis, there is no need to define another one over here. So using H and then again using V, you can go vertically down, and then H again to wherever we were, and then V again to 10, right? So this is how, like a simplified version of line, if you know that you will go directly on x-axis and y-axis, right? So nothing really different in that sense. Now the cool parts are curve commands. So SVG supports two types of curvatures, right? One is the cubic and the other one is called quadratic. So quadratic is a bit difficult. We're not going to go dive into that, but I can definitely talk about the cubic and how you can create it. So in order to create a cubic curve in your path D attribute, basically, right? What you want to do is you put C and then you define your first control point, you define your second control point, and then where the end of the line or the curve should be. And by these control points, what I mean are these. Let me zoom in a bit here so you can see what I mean. So you can see that here you have a path M1010, so 1010 is the start of where I want to be, and then using C, it defines the first control point, which is 20 and 20, which is this one over here, right? So this is my first control point, right? Then the second control point is on 40 and 20, right? So this is my second control point. So my first control point, my second control point, and then 50 and 10 is where my curve needs to be finished, right? So as you can see, defining these control points, you can see that you have this very nice curvature. And changing the control points, changes the way the starting and the ending curve will look like, right? So basically, it's like this curvature is, the angle is based on where your control point ends up to be. So if your control point is over here, obviously you have a little bit of a more angle, so your curve starts like this, right? So this is less angle, your curve starts like this, and the more the length or the further the control point gets, the more you're gonna have a curve, right? So going back to Illustrator, I can basically show you what it really means over here, right? So let's start by using the pen tool, I will just click and drag. So you have your first control point over here, then again I go a little bit here, and then my second control point over here, right? There you go. So now I can pretty much use this tool, which is direct selection tool, to kind of click this, and then by using this, by using my control points, right, I can pretty much define the curvature, right, of the starting point over here, right? You see, and this longer I make it, the bigger my curve will be, right? The same thing actually over here, right? So I can use the same thing over here, and then the longer I get, the bigger my curve will be, right? And obviously using these control points, I can define different types of curvatures, right? It's a pretty simple, relatively simple thing, but obviously when you're creating sophisticated curves, you don't really want to go ahead and programmatically create your curves. You want to use a tool like this so that you can easily have control over what you're creating, right? So this is called the cubic curve, as I showed you. The other curve that I want to tell you, which is important in our sort of tutorial, is called arcs, right? So arc itself is basically part of an ellipse or part of a circle, right? And how you define it is very interesting. So you use the A, and then you have Rx and Ry. So Rx stands for the radius in x-axis, and Ry stands for the radius of that ellipse or circle on y-axis. So pretty much if you use the same values for this, it will be a perfect circle, right? So in this example, it's not. So if you look at this, we have A, 30 and 50. So 30 on x-axis, and then 50 on y-axis, right? And then we have something called x-axis rotation. So this basically means how much you want to rotate your curvature, right? Or the imaginary circle that the curvature or the arc is part of, right? So in the first example, you can see that it's 0. So it's perfectly like standing right over here. But on the second example, you can see it's minus 45. And you can see that there is a rotation of minus 45 over here, right? So that's no difficult. The two more difficult stuff is over here, large arc flag and sweep flag, and then obviously at the end you just define where the ending point of your curve should be, right? So just to tell you a little bit, but I would recommend that you go over, read all this tutorial. So large arc flag, basically what we have, if you have 2 points, there are 2 ellipses. There are only 2 ellipses that can connect those 2 points, right? I cannot visualize like here, but you can imagine that by standard and by math, there are only having 2 points. There are 2 types of ellipses. One is bigger than the other, right? And then you have a sweep flag, which basically sweeps the arc, right, to the smaller angle or the bigger angle. So if the sweep flag is 0, it's going to start, for example, on the smaller angle, and if you change it to 1, it will choose the second half over here, right? So let's go start creating some curves for ourselves, right? So I'm going to go create a little bit bigger, let's say 600 and 600 on my SVG, and then I will give it a style, maybe background red again. So we have this area over here, and then I will choose my path and then my D attributes. And as you know, I have to start with somewhere using M. I will go maybe, I don't know, like 100 and 100. So that's where I want to start. And then I will use the A, which is my arc. And then I will try to create my Rx and Ry. So radius on X, let's say 40, the same for Ry. So this is a perfect circle. So this arc will be part of my circle. And then I want to define my rotation for the imaginary circle. So 0, right? I want to choose the first circle or the first ellipse, in this case circle, and then I don't want my the sweeping flag, and then my endpoint I want it to be from 100 to 100 to be to 200 and 200, right? So this is how my curve looks like. So let's just change this to 100 so that we have a perfect curve like this. So obviously I can go here, I can define my fill to be none or transparent, and then I will give it a stroke path, stroke width of maybe 10, like this. So you can see it's a bit bigger. I can always go and say my stroke line cap should be maybe round, so that you have this kind of, it's like a person who is laughing, right? So again, going back to my path, I went to the point 100 and 100, so 100 on X and 100 on Y, which stands over here. And then I use the arc. I define my original Rx and Ry, which is the radius on X and Y. Maybe I can just show you how it looks if I change this to 80. So you can see that my radius is a much bigger area. Radius, I choose the first circle, and then if I change, sorry, no orientation, let me just change the orientation here. What do you say? So let's change it to minus 30, right? Now you can see how that ellipsis is oriented, right? So minus 30, if I say 30, so let's say 30, it will be the other way. So you can see how you can play with these values over here to create what you want. And then obviously if I choose the, this is my sweep flag, if I change it to 1, it's going to select the other part of, you know, the arc on the other side of my imaginary ellipsis, right? So going back to 0 degree, I'm going to just basically go back to this, and then obviously if I go more, you can see how it looks bigger. And if I want to change this to smaller, the only thing is that I will do this, right? And you can imagine that how easily you can, using JavaScript, change these values over time to create animations, right? So going back to our SVG animated burger menu, what I'm going to do is I am going to comment out my second and third path, so basically just the top bar, and then maybe just removing for now my HTML. You can see how the arc looks like. So by the way, this arc is not created by me, it's built by a person from the CodeDrops website, and I just want to tell you how you can basically create this. So if I go to my SVG just as a point of reference, changing the style on this to be background, maybe again red. So what happens is that we say go to 30 and 40. So x-axis 30 and y-axis, and on the y direction 40, it ends up over here. Then create a line to 70 and 40. So create a line 70, 40, and then using the curve command or cubic curve command as we went through, the first control point will be on 90 and 40. So the first control point will be over here somewhere, and then the second control point will be on 90 and 75, so pretty much the same x but 75 over here, and then the end of our curvature should be on 60 and 85, right? So just to, maybe it's better if I go to Illustrator and show you, open this. This is an SVG, and then here I can easily tell you where are those control points. So let's get started. So this is my first point, right? Here we have it on 30 and 40. So we have a line over here. You can see that it actually visualizes your x and y pretty much exactly. Let me just copy this and paste it somewhere over here. Yep, we have it over here. Maybe I'm just going to go ahead and make it a bit smaller. So just use transform, then scale, maybe 40%. Yep, not bad. So just move it over here. so that we have a general idea of how it looks. So coming here, we start from 30 and 40. So this is, this is 30 and 40, right? Then you use a line to here, 70 and 40. Then we use a curvature, but our first control point is on 90 and 40. So I can actually click on this, and this is our handle, which is our first control point, which is on 90 and 40. The second control point, obviously here, is 90 and 75. You can see on X they are in the same place, but on Y it's 75. And then the ending point is on 60 and 85, right? So this is the way this curve is created. Then we have an arc, right? With the width, with the radius of 40 and 40, so perfect circle, no orientation, no x-axis rotation. Well, the first circle, then I want the sweep here, the sweeping flag to be 1, because if I change this sweep flag over here to 0, you will see that my arc will be over here, but I want it to be over here, right? So 1. And then obviously again back into Illustrator, we have over here, and then obviously it goes to 20 and 20, and then from there we kind of create a line to 80 and 80, right? So pretty much easy, nothing specific, or relatively easy. Again, don't go over create these paths programmatically, even though now I went over it and described you how this is created, by all means, but obviously you want to use Illustrator or some other tools to create this path, maybe based on an image that you've drawn, right? So you have your image, you put it as a reference, and then you start drawing on your image, and then you go over each point, and then you kind of can tune and things change things to kind of take the shape of whatever final version of that shape you want it to be, right? So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you guys will go over SVG path. I hope you guys go over maybe downloading Illustrator, playing a little bit, and then in the next tutorial I will show you how I created that cool animation. So I hope you like this tutorial. Go shoot your questions in the comment sections if any, and I will see you next time. Have a good day and night.